Welcome back to another UNC basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you're checking us out on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated, a THI publisher, Andrew Johnson, joining me as he so often does when we talk about Carolina hoops, especially the extended version podcast. Our very own David Sisk, a longtime coach, AAU, college, high school. He's kind of dipped his toe in a lot of coaching waters. So David is a guy we always go to every couple of weeks to get in-depth stuff about the Heels. And David, the question people are asking right now is a pretty simple one, but I don't know if there's a simple answer for it. You'll have to be the judge of that. This is an incredibly inconsistent basketball team, wildly inconsistent. And I think it dates back to the win at Pitt on January 26th. Tar Heels played really well. That was their most impressive, first minute to 40th minute game of the season. A week later, they're awful at Clemson. Then they put 91 up on the board or whatever it was at Duke. And the next game, 48 at Virginia. And then we've been kind of going back and forth with this team since then. In the last a week and a half, you've got the rout of Louisville. You've got the home loss to Marquette. You've got the incredible second half against Florida State. And then a game in which they had energy, but they just did not play well. There were so many things they didn't do right. They didn't dot their I's or cross their T's against Syracuse, and they allowed a Syracuse team, I think, was primed to get run out of its own building to actually win the game Monday night. So that's where we stand with this team right now, up and down, all over the place. As a coach, how do you explain how a team could be so wildly inconsistent like that?
Well, I told you this afternoon we probably need to get this segment sponsored by Jim Beam or some local liquor store conglomerate in the Triangle over there, because that may be the only way for Carolina fans to ease their misery right now. It probably makes a coach want to do the same thing. There are no easy answers for it. If you look at different teams, there's reasons, but when I look at this North Carolina squad, the first thing that to me is beginning to become just commonplace is they're just really pedestrian. I don't see the energy. I know you said you saw them play with some energy last night against North Carolina. I just don't feel it. It's just like they plod along. They're not going to be good defensively. I kind of go through the motions offensively. And it's the only time that I've seen them really come out of the shell and play like an energized group that was just rabid with their hair on fire was the second half against Florida State. And I think the reason there is Walker Kessler is that type of player. And when Walker Kessler scores, he's dunking, he's running, he's fist pumping, he's screaming, and the team got behind him. And North Carolina will do it some. They did it the last 5 minutes last night when they get desperate. And we've seen them before get desperate late in games, and then they pick up the energy. But I just don't see it. And so I wonder if that second half, it looked really good against Florida State, but if that was an outlier, because, they were behind double digits on their home floor. And it reminded me, I'm trying to remember the game earlier.
With fans in the building too.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the game earlier in the year where basically North Carolina was just leaking oil at the worst, and you're just ready to take the keys and start walking. And Roy made a sub, and they had a big run there in the second. And I can't even remember the sub or the team, but we've seen this before from North Carolina. So, you go back to Marquette, they're down almost 20 points. They're down 14-15 to a team last night that basically had to crawl to the finish line. You didn't know if they had enough bodies to finish the game or not. Yeah. And I just wonder, this team's usually you score 48 at Virginia, you score 99 against Louisville, but I'll be honest, Louisville didn't have their full team. They did have emotion, but North Carolina is going to have emotion against Duke. There's no middle ground where you really know what this team's identity is. They're either playing to the ceiling or they're playing to the floor. And it seems like here a lot lately they're playing more to the floor.
I think they had energy early against Syracuse. The rebounding numbers, I think,
They got up
very
8-0, 10-0. And then I hate to interrupt. I thought Syracuse zone, that was kind of the worst team because that they could have played, because they're building off that energy from Florida State. They get off to the big lead, and then Syracuse just kind of stagnates it with that zone. And then all of a sudden they can't make decisions and they're holding the ball and looking around everywhere. And I'll let you take it from there. But I thought the zone really got them stagnated.
Yeah, well, I think that they allowed it to happen. They've had a lot of success against that zone. In our 5 keys before the game, I broke down, the 3 elements of success they've had against that zone. This team kind of ignored that. They tried a little early. You saw a couple early shots from Garrison Brooks around the free throw line, and that's what they can get. He had a few dunk downs, but they went away from that. Post-to-post success is something that they've had a lot of against that zone. But I agree with you in the sense that they had the energy earlier. They were up 18-3 on the glass at one point. A lot of that is energy. A lot of that's they're just better up front than Syracuse. This is not a good front line for Syracuse. They've had better in the past. But when they start to go through a period of missing shots, and then they throw it away a few times, and then they give up a few buckets, it's like the collective lull sets in. Yeah. And they have a really hard time re-energizing the energy. Sometimes they're better off to not have energy early and eventually pick it up at some point in the game. Then it could stick with them for a while. But if they have it out of the gate and then lose it, it takes time. And they made a push late Monday night, but I think Syracuse kicked open the door with both feet and said, come on in. Because Syracuse should have put them away and won by 15. Shame on Syracuse for not doing that. Carolina deserves a little credit for making that push. They had a couple of 4-point plays, but they also missed opportunities. They missed some conversions. Caleb Love with the 2 free throws. It was almost as if Carolina had dug deep enough of a hole that no matter what happened, they weren't going to entirely come out of it. And I kind of think that's where some of the problem with this team lies. They did what they did against FSU, but I agree that that was an outlier. And this is sort of goes back to the inconsistency in you understanding young teams, and young teams with a couple of old guys, and maybe the old guys aren't great leaders. It's what it appears from my vantage point, that maybe the older guys just aren't the kind of fanny slappers you need on a team that relies so heavily on dudes that just turned 19 years old. How much of a factor do you think that is? And do you think having to rely on freshmen that sort of pick themselves up during the course of a game makes this a greater challenge for Willie than perhaps it should be?
I'm going to be careful here because anything I say on this point, speculation. I'm not there. So I think
be very careful.
Roy, he's the guy that knows. He's there every day. And I'm going to preface right up front, I'm not. So my guess is no better than anybody that's watching this. We've all got our opinions here. You know what they say about that.
Yeah.
But when I look at them, you said something before the year started, maybe in our preseason podcast that we did, Andrew, when you said when Andrew Platek is not scoring, if he really doesn't figure in to what this team is doing as one of the major contributors as a senior, how much will they listen to him? And I don't know, but I think that's something that needs to be discussed. Could Leakey be in that role? And Garrison Brooks just doesn't, and I've probably harped on him more than any other player, but when I talk about methodical, just a lack of energy, watching him run the floor, watching his body language, he's just, maybe I like emotional players, which he's not. Maybe I like him to run the floor like Walker Kessler runs the floor for a big man, which he doesn't. And it just seems so, like I said, just plodding along. And maybe that's the thing. But, you don't have a Tyler Hansborough. You don't have a Luka Garza. You don't have some of those guys and just grabbing people up and, just and dragging them along with you. So I really don't see that. And, you're dependent a lot on these freshmen, but I think this point of the year, these guys are not freshmen anymore. And I see some of them are reverting, and I look at the turnovers. You know, North Carolina has been one of the most turnover-plagued teams in the country, who have averaged 15 turnovers a game. It seems like it ought to be a lot more than that. I'm surprised that's the average. But in the last 3 games, 19, 21, I think they had 21 in the win against Florida State, which is incredible. And then 20 last night. So in the last 3 games, they're averaging 5 more turnovers per game than they have had for the year. So it tells
60 turnovers, last 3 games, 60 turnovers, leading to 72 points.
So that's a team. That's a team from that standpoint in regression, and its players handling the ball in regression. And, you know, that's not a good sign this late in the season, you know, when it happens, because I just think you come to a point where you're not freshmen anymore, and even older players, you know, need to improve. And it's just impossible to get any type of rhythm, any type of cohesion when you're constantly turning the ball over. Football is probably a better analogy. A team gets 450, 500 yards offense a game, and they hit 2 or 3 fumbles. A quarterback throws 5 interceptions. You've seen it.
Yeah.
And it just deflates.
Yeah. That's interesting because I hear coaches say, hey, they're not freshmen anymore. And Roy made that comment a couple of weeks ago. And my take has always been, well, they are freshmen until the end of their freshman year, especially this time of year, because everything is different when the calendar turns to March. And they've never experienced any of this stuff. And I do see freshmen sometimes revert back a little bit when they get to this time of year, because there's a lot of pressure mounting. Now, this program doesn't talk a whole lot about what's in front of them other than the next game. Roy knows Duke's next, and he knows the ACC tournament's next. But any other time during the year, if you ask him what is the game after the next game, he legitimately doesn't really know. He coaches to get better that day. A lot of the great ones do that. But I think, though, the freshman thing, maybe if you have 1 or 2 freshmen, you could say they're not really freshmen anymore. But when you have as many as they have, should you expect them to sort of not be freshmen, or is it more difficult to expect them to play above the freshman standard, especially when they don't have older guys who are smacking their fannies and showing them by leading the way? And I'm not saying that there's no leadership, but it appears at times that they don't have, and I call it a fanny smacker because I see a lot of those guys. They're barkers, they're fanny smackers. Sometimes great leaders don't have to be guys that are yelling all the time. They have to be communicators and lead by example guys. I don't know how much of that they have right now. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic year, we don't have the same kind of access where I would have a better feel for something like that. But it appears from my vantage point that some of that is lacking, and it's kind of slowing that process of the freshman maybe becoming something a little bit more than freshmen. This
is a hard year for freshmen. And I mean, this point's been beat to death with basketball people all year long, but I don't think you can underestimate it. Even when I get it out of my system and say, okay, let's move ahead, I'll have a high school coach say, man, North Carolina, it's got to be tough this year playing all the freshmen when you didn't have them in the summer, you didn't have exhibition games, you know, you didn't have that preseason non-conference schedule of mid-majors. And even now, you know, they don't have full capacity with what they can do. A lot of the meetings that take place from coach to player, instead of being in the office together and being face-to-face, which is the best way to communicate, they're doing the same thing you and I are doing right now. It's on a Zoom. So that's got to be very, very difficult. And I think in the whole basketball thing, I'm on a group chat, group text. We're probably about, 12 to 15 people. I would say half of those are NBA scouts. And they have really been talking the last week or so how much the G League has, and I'm not sold on this, okay? But the conversations there, that the G League, how good that's been, because they've had the access. They're basically in a bubble in the G
Yeah.
League. They're all playing the same. So they've had that access where they're getting the reps, they're getting the meetings, they're getting all that. I'm not necessarily sold because I watched them play Delaware yesterday, and I think that's about the third time in 2 weeks they've gotten beat by 40 points. And the G League Ignite teams, the one with Jalen Green and Isaiah Todd and Jonathan Kamiga, and all those 18-year-olds,
Yeah.
So I'm not sold on it, but I can see that just from the standpoint, it's so important that they get the reps and the meetings and the work with the trainers and all the individual work and all that. And man, it's been hard, I think, for freshmen all over the country and coaches who are coaching them. And it just so happens 2021 is probably the youngest team Roy's ever had.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're the 325th most experienced team in the country. And they're 339th in opponent steals. Syracuse had 15 of them. I think that teams kind of know a lot about what they're doing. I think that they telegraph a lot of what they're doing, and part of that goes to the youth. There are other things we could probably discuss ad nauseum about why some of it's not working. Let me twist this into a little bit of a positive and see what you think about this. Well, two things. One, before I go to that part, I want to throw this at you too. I had someone I talked to today who's a diehard Carolina fan. They're a passionate Carolina fan, and they're pretty logical, sensible, smart Carolina fan who knows basketball pretty well. And he said, I know that they have 3 more games left, at least. Duke, first game in the ACC tournament, and probably NCAA tournament, although I think that they need to win Saturday or Wednesday in Greensboro to be more comfortable with respect to the NCAA tournament. I don't think they can lose out and be assured a bid to the tournament. That said, he said, I want them to play games. I know these kids need experience, but I also think the best thing for this group right now would be for the off season to get here so they can all begin focusing on what they're going to be in the next year. I thought that was an interesting comment. And I asked him where that came from, and he personalized. He said that was just, maybe he's getting tired of watching them play all over the place. For you as a coach, when you get to the end of a season, how invigorating, when things are kind of wobbling along as they are for a club like Carolina, how invigorating can it be to suddenly launch into the offseason? You get a chance to exhale for a few days, sleep in for a couple of days, and then begin working toward the next year. And can that be on the horizon sort of affect kids when they get to this time of year?
Do you want the 24-year-old David Sisk version, or the version that David Sisk is trying to figure out when I can retire?
24-year-old, that'll make more sense.
Oh, yeah. I'll give you an example. I remember last year, I'll just personalize it here. For the high school I coach at, we had a great run here for a number of years, and we're at a smaller school. We had a bad year. And it really weighs on you. The season's long, and man, it's just, you're counting the days, really. It's like you see the guys in prison putting up the mark and going, and that's what I was doing. So, the head coach, like the next morning, texts me, and he's like, all right, we got to do this, this, and this, and this. And I thought, man, can we not, when is there no break here, man? I want to get out to golf clubs. Is there no break? And he's like, man, I don't like to get embarrassed. And I wouldn't say North Carolina's getting embarrassed, because the season we had was like North Carolina had last year. So North Carolina's not got embarrassed this year. I mean, they could get to the NCAA tournament. So I think you could say that a little bit last year, but they've still got a lot to play for. So, I don't think if you ask Roy Williams and you ask any of those players, do you want to get it over now and just call it quits, or do you want to go play the NCAA tournament? Well,
I wasn't even coming close to insinuating that. It's just that someone asked me a question. I said, sometimes though human nature is what it is. You're talking about retirement. I totally get it. Like, I know that my end of season's coming up here after spring football, and it'll slow between the end of basketball and spring football. And I was talking to my wife this evening before she went to work at the hospital that, hey, let's go here in May. Let's go here in June. It is human nature to start looking ahead when you get to the end of the road. And going back to the fact that only a couple of older guys in the team and a lot of young guys, it was an interesting thing, and I wanted to see what you thought about that.
Here's my thought. From a coach's standpoint, I'm trying to figure out how I can make this roster better. So I'm looking. Here would be my question. I've had this on my mind. I've not said it, but okay, we're talking turnovers. We're talking freshman point guards that have, as the season has went on, we are not seeing the results of quarterbacking a team, of running the offense, of not turning the ball over. We're not seeing it, okay? It's went the other way. So I'm thinking, all right, who's on the transfer market? And that's the thing. I'm not looking at the point guards that are out there now are not good enough, okay? They're not the answer. I'm not looking at some reclass out 2022 where I'm bringing in a babysitter with him, okay? I'm looking the transfer portal. You're already seeing them. Pitt's lost half their starting lineup. Xavier Johnson's out there. You're starting to see others now that are in the transfer market, and you're going to see a ton. I talked to a coach Sunday night and was asking him, it was a recruiting question, and he kind of caught me off guard with it. And he said, the portal is going to be crazy. He said, you are going to see coaches fired. And we already knew that because of the year of immediate eligibility. He said, you are not going to believe the number of head coaches you're going to see fired this year because of the last year they were basically given a free pass with COVID. So you're not only answering for this year, you're answering for last year, and you're already seeing one out in the ACC. You're getting ready to see one out in the Big Ten here in the next.
New Mexico just fired their coach too.
Yeah. So, and you've seen a bunch of mid-majors already done it. I'm 3 or 4 this week. So you're going to have all that. So those guys, they want to play. They don't want to wait on a new one to come in. I think a place like North Carolina is alluring. So if I am the head coach at North Carolina and I'm on that staff, I'm thinking about how can I improve this roster? I'll give you one more example here. I don't want to get long. I know I'm long-winded, but
so am I. Don't
I'll give you Nate Oates at Alabama, and he's one of the candidates for National Coach of the Year. They've won the SEC. They've already clinched it. People look at that playing style, but I'm trying to remember who the analyst was, and he hit it right on the head. He said, look, the thing that impresses me with Nate Oates is how he has flipped that roster in basically in a year. You know, of what he has now and what he had when he got there, man, that roster doesn't – he said it's amazing how he changed that roster in 1 year. They were already pretty decent. They had Kyra Lewis. They had John Petty. They had Herb Jones, guys like that. But, man, you're talking about Quinterly transferring in from Villanova. You're talking about some really good freshmen, some really good sophomores now. And, you know, those seniors leave, and they'll be right back next year. So that was the thing. Yeah, they're fun to watch with all those threes they shoot and his philosophy, kind of Mike D'Antoni type deal. But that roster turnover and the way he added to that roster, that's why Alabama's, you know, probably a 2 seed this year.
I was asked about that twice in the last 3 days about, do you think Roy would go? He actually was born out of a conversation about what's happening at Pitt, and this person asked about Xavier Johnson. I said, I don't think so. I don't think he. I don't see Roy doing that. I think one of the reasons
I think he goes to Indiana.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons Roy got very married to Caleb Love, and I told somebody this after the Miami game when Caleb was still struggling a ton. I said, look, Caleb is a very talented basketball player, but he's trying to play a new position. And it's not just a new position where you dribble the ball from a different perspective. It's everything that goes into it. You know, it's literally the quarterback on the court in basketball, and it's very demanding to do it for Roy Williams. There is a very high standard, and that could be a lot for a guy to be able to deal with. And I said, you know, he's gonna roll with him because he knows that every mistake he makes from this point on, Roy probably believes passionately that Caleb will eventually get it, and those mistakes will turn into strengths. They will fuel a strengthening of his game. And, we see sequences, and we actually have seen more of a commitment to managing the game, which I think is really, really helpful for him. And I do think that when they get into the offseason, that he's a guy that's going to benefit if all the pros can come back, because they'll teach him a lot. And even when they're playing pickup, they're still going to do high ball screens and rolls. It's amazing sometimes when you see him miss the rolls. He missed the screener going to the basket. He missed Kessler a couple times the other day doing that. And I think having an off season to actually exhale there and really soak in a lot of what he didn't do well, and also the things he did do well, because he's had some good games. He's had some good stretches. I believe that he's going to stick with him, assuming, of course, that Caleb doesn't leave to be paid somewhere, which I don't think is going to happen. You've been pretty solid on that for a while yourself, and you got some connections there. But I think an off season, Roy believes he'll make a big jump. People need to remember, there were a lot of folks that thought that for the first 3 quarters of Joel Berry's freshman year, he wasn't even an ACC player. There were people that were critical of Marcus Page when he was a freshman, and Roy kept saying he's going to be a real good player. Roy totally believes in his judgment and his vision of the future. And I think he's seeing a lot of the same things in Caleb that he saw in Marcus Page, that he saw in Joel Berry, and some of the other guys that came along that got some criticism early on, but they learned from their lumps.
Yeah, and that's probably the best way. Probably the toughest taskmaster, but quickly, I would say that I think some of the and now going 180 degrees away from what I said a while ago. Probably between your freshman and your sophomore year, if that improvement is made, the just experience in the off season, that's probably when you see the biggest jump, is that sophomore season. Just comfort, experience, kind of know what the coaches want. But I have to say this: if you're Roy, do you put all the eggs in that basket and say, "Look, I have no doubt"? That's the whole deal with being a head coach. I don't care how established you are, making those decisions. That's why you've got the big bucks, because I promise you, they're not easy. I don't know that will be. I know from times when me coaching, even going back, it wasn't a big a level as North Carolina. It was NAIA level. But, man, just the communications, the behind the doors, coaching staff, sit down, come to Jesus meeting on your roster. Is this player good enough? Who do we get at this spot? What do we need? And, man, I'm going to tell you what, the bones are laid bare when it happens. So there'll be, no matter what happens, I think there's got to be deep conversation about it, but like I said, behind closed doors where nobody knows.
Okay, on the flip side, a positive thing that we can discuss here, and I was on a podcast the other night and I brought this up, and I said, I think it's interesting, Walker Kessler becoming the 5th different Carolina freshman to win ACC Freshman of the Week, Rookie of the Week, which is really impressive when you have 5 different guys to do it. And we're talking a lot about the inconsistency of this team, and that kind of speaks to it as well, that they've had 5 different freshmen that have flared up. To me, the positive is that they know that they flared up. They've actually had a week where they were really good. So they know they can be really good in a North Carolina uniform, pleasing Roy Williams, and against the kind of competition that they play. So that they can do that. The off-season mission is going to be, okay, how much can each of those 5 guys consistently climb to that point for next season? And I think that's the determining factor, whether or not the 21-22 Tar Heels are a national title contender or a Final Four contender, or whether they're just sort of in between where they are now and in between being a contender. Because they're going to go into the offseason with each of them knowing, hey, I was really good in a stretch. And that can kind of fuel you, I think, to learn and more effectively learn from all the times where you weren't very good, because at least you can do it. In your days coaching, your time being around kids, is it easier to get a kid motivated who has had some success but also a lot of struggles? Or is it just, the success almost doesn't matter? You just have to focus on the struggles.
I go back to what a great Tar Heel, Kenny Smith, used to say. And the first time I heard him mention this was probably 15, 20 years ago. And I don't even remember who the team was. But he said that it was impossible for an NBA team to win a championship without going through a struggle in the previous years, or at least 1 year. Going out early in the playoffs, not getting into playoffs. He said they had to have that really just for the motivation and to keep their heads on straight. So, yeah, I think you probably have got them where you want them if you're Roy, because they know what they can do, but they've also had enough struggles to where they're going to listen. And Lou Holtz used to say, he'd say, look, when a football team lost on Saturday, he said Monday morning, he said, that's the greatest position in the world. If you're a coach, you've got them exactly where you want them that Monday morning, because they're going to be humble. They're going to listen. So let me give you a scenario here. I know North Carolina's different. Kansas, Duke, Kentucky, UCLA, those are different places because the standard is there and the expectations there. There's very little wiggle room. But let's say you've got this same roster and this same team, and you're at Wake Forest, or you're at Clemson, or you're at Virginia Tech, or you're at Georgia Tech. Okay. How excited are you about the future? That you've got, you'd be happy to get in the NCAA tournament. Now, for North Carolina fans, that's not good enough. But when you look at it and say, hey, like you say, we got 5 players who are ACC players of the week. Hopefully they're going to be back. At least 4 of them we think will be. Yeah. How excited are you about, what's ahead?
I think so. And I actually think the future is very bright for this group. And I do think they will all benefit from a lot of the crap that they've gone through this year. We've seen them kind of do it from week to week. And we've seen the high ends lately are much higher than they were earlier in the year. I mean, the way they played against, I know Louisville was coming off a pause, and Louisville has come off pauses twice. They were routed at Wisconsin. They were routed at Carolina. But the way Carolina played, how connected they were on the court, the way they executed, the way they went about it was very impressive that day. And then, you lose to Marquette, and what they did in responding to FSU had them dead in the water. And Carolina responded, and you don't fluster FSU that much. It's a very well-coached team. It's a veteran team, and the Tar Heels were fantastic. And this leads me to Walker Kessler. And I know we've only got a few more minutes because you got to run and I got to run, but I had to have a few moments on Walker Kessler. I thought that your film review about his game against FSU was fantastic. And I'm totally with you about how sometimes you just got a guy who raises everyone's energy. Here's this guy doing this and going about things that way. You're either going to tag along and raise your energy level, or you're not. And if you're not, you're going to stand out even more. I thought he was infectious, and I don't think guys have been infectious a lot on that team this year. And I think the future for him very soon, like sophomore year kind of soon, when he builds up some strength and he can deal with the contact and play through contact a little bit better, post a little bit better, seal a little bit better. I think he has a chance to be a phenomenal player by this time next year. And if he does that, and Caleb Love learns so much from so much that went on this year, a lot of the negatives, and doesn't internalize it too much, they have a chance to be really, really good next year.
Yeah, I like Kessler. I love him, actually. And the thing is, when you evaluate post, obviously size is the first thing you look at. He's got that. But how soft are his hands? That's always the second thing. He made 2 or 3 catches that we finished. He made one on I think it was Leaky Black's drive, where he just dumped it off, but he doesn't bring the ball down. He can't. I mean, he has like a 3-4-foot rifle pass. It's here, and he goes straight up. He doesn't bring it down. But the catch he made when Leaky hit him on the break, when he got behind the defense, where he's on a run, he catches it in traffic. I said it looked like a wide receiver looking it in with 2 safeties closing in on each side and run the post. And he finishes that. I went, my God, and that's just shows where his hands are at. He's got tremendous feet. He's well drilled. He has been well drilled. Now, right now, it's basic. Show the shoulder to the right and go back to the left. And I noticed that on his jump hook like that. And there's one thing, he knows what shot he can get off. That jump hook, when he gets to where he can put that shoulder into somebody, it's unguardable. You know, you look at weapons. Kareem had the sky hook, which was the greatest weapon in the history of basketball. Kessler's got that jump hook that he's got touch. He can knock it down time after time after time, and nobody can block it. Nobody can get to it. He's just got to be able to get where he can take the bump and finish that, like you said. His feet are good. The thing I like, he runs like a deer. I don't know how quick he is, you know, but you watch him run the floor and sprint the floor. He gets behind the defense. He's fast as fast baseline to baseline as anybody out there. I mean, and he is digging when he runs.
He got strides too.
Yes, yes. And I've seen it coming. I've said this. I think in ball screen defense, he's the most consistent player. I think he runs the floor hard every time. He'll get on the floor. And we've seen it coming for a few games where his minutes went up. He started playing double-digit minutes before Florida State. So Roy was building more trust. You know, I'm sure he's like that in practice. He's energetic. I mean, everything's there. And I agree with you 100%. You've seen it coming. It manifested itself against Florida State. They had a little bit of trouble in the zone where he didn't get the ball in spots that he needed to get the ball in. But, man, I'm all in. I agree with you 100%.
They got Duke coming up this weekend, and then they go to Greensboro for the ACC tournament. I kind of think I'm going to do a podcast with Jacob on Wednesday morning where we're going to talk about the Duke game and kind of look ahead their NCAA tournament resume. And I don't want to go resume with you, but as far as getting maximum out of this season, I think if they're able to play 5 more games, you got Duke, win one in Greensboro, maybe they lose because they're so up and down, and then go to the NCAA tournament and get a win, keep Roy's perfect record in opening round games intact, and then maybe you lose to a 1 or a 2 seed in the second round. I think if they get to that point, they go 18-11, and they get to the second round of the NCAA tournament, with all the things that we've talked about, and there are a lot of concerns out there, and if you go to our message board, if you go to fan pages all over the place, you would think that they're 4-15 when you read what people write out there. And that's one of the beauties about covering a program like North Carolina. You do a lot of stuff with Kentucky, is there's some similarities there that, you know, if there's a tiny little chink in the armor, people kind of put the magnifying glass on that chink and they just want to beat it to death. There are positives. If this club could go 18-11 with the kind of years had, with as young as they've been, with their ACC preseason player of the year senior not even coming close to having that kind of year, with the fact that they've had some really, really difficult time adjusting, especially in the backcourt, to playing at this level. Beat Duke twice. You're the team that got Roy's 900th win. Get to the second round of the NCAA tournament. Win 18 games in a shortened pandemic season. I think that that's there for the taking for this club, and I think that that's a fantastic season when you all put it in a bow and wrap it up.
I think it's what Ken Palm predicted. You know, I mean, they've basically been right on schedule. I know there have been some up and downs. They probably didn't pick them to beat Florida State, and they certainly didn't predict them to lose to Marquette. But for the most part, they've been pretty well on pace. So you've had a schedule pretty much like the metrics said you would have. And I don't think they're a team, like we said, they've not made the improvements where they can really get outside of that window. But, hey, you never know. When you get into March, the postseason, it's a new season. Everybody's 0-0. And I think you'll have a team. This will answer your question that you asked earlier. I think sometimes when you have a young team, they really enjoy that postseason part of it because, let's face it, you're going to have some teams in Greensboro, I think they're ready to go home. I don't think North Carolina's one. I think you probably got a lot of all the quarantining, and you can't tell me that you're a 19, 20-year-old kid and there's not kids out there thinking, man, I can get out of this quarantine bubble. I can go to parties. I can, you know, and it's even more attractive now than ever because the season's a grind. So, you know, if they stay focused and really come in motivated into the postseason, you know, anything can happen. I think we could have a very wild postseason. Almost like I would compare it to the bowl games. All the upsets and underdogs in the bowl games. Well, you're Auburn and you lose the SEC championship game and you get beat by Central Florida, or you're whoever and you lose the ACC championship game, or you lose the Big Ten championship, and you'll have teams that'll be 7, 10, 14-point favorites, and they do not want to be there. And I think it's what you could be looking at this March.
Yeah, it'll be, I have a hard time projecting a stretch of positive consistency with this team when we haven't really even seen it. Even when they were strung together some wins, probably their best 3-game stretch was Wake, State, Pitt. And Wake is very flawed. Pitt was already starting to trend toward what's happened now there. And NC State, they're a mediocre team. Carolina had them at home. They should be. They always beat them at home pretty much. So that wasn't exactly a
That was a tough matchup. You go back, that was really the first team that, and like I said, Keats, that was a lot on him. He had a great game plan. He knew how to expose those weaknesses, and he had the roster that could do it.
Yeah, and then Carolina responded very well to it the next time they played them. And that was kind of the good stretch they were in. I think it's been an interesting season so far. We'll obviously do another one of these when the season ends, or maybe before the NCAA tournament. Not sure, depending on how things go, when they'll be scheduled to play if they go to the NCAA tournament. I think they will. I think they'll take care of Duke, and I think that'll seal the deal for them. But the next few games to me are still about learning. And if they could find consistency, if they can close this thing out and find some degree of consistency where they're in the 12 to 13 turnover range and they're shooting 44% as a team, and Caleb Love starts to string some positive stuff together, you could shoot off into the offseason with a pretty good feeling in a year where there were a lot of lessons.
And they're going to have to score points. If you say, what would you need from this team? And obviously, less turnovers, but they are what they are defensively. They're going to have to score. So you look last night when Leaky Black scored with 5:31 left to go in the game. Interestingly enough, the perimeter players from North Carolina were 5 of 31 at that time. And I was making a running count of each perimeter shot. There were 18 turnovers. So at that point, they were 2 for 13 from 3, and one of the threes were a goaltend. So Playtech's 3 was a goaltend. Yeah.
By the way, you know what they were in layups last night? They were 11 for 21 in layups. They were around 50% in layups the last 5 or 6 games.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
and that'll be the next podcast, because I want to talk to you about bigs getting positioned and being too far into the basket. That'll be the next one we do. So hold me to it. And that'll be a chance where we can maybe single out elements of this team as we do podcasts at the end of the season and then into the off season. But that's one I definitely want to hit on.
Okay.
All right. He's David Sisk. I'm Andrew. Was there something else you wanted to say?
No, so I look forward to it.
All right. Absolutely. I always look forward to these. I always learn something from you. He's David Sisk. I'm Andrew Jones. Be sure to check out TarHeelIllustrated.com. We cover the Tar Heels in football and basketball and recruiting. We go where the Tar Heels go, although sometimes pandemic times and ice storms happen, so we don't always make it to the arena. But generally speaking, we're there wherever they go. So go check out our site. We're grinding every day, 365 days.
I don't want to hear you about your can't go anywhere. I bet you I've not been more than 20 miles from home in the last 14 months. So
well, I've had some good excuses that, no credentials at Duke, and that's just down the road. And then, of course, the Syracuse game, I had something that came up with my daughter that I had to deal with. So I had to bug out of that trip at the last second. But it's really weird covering a game from TV. Very, very weird. I hope it doesn't happen very much in the future. But I hear you. We will get the THI staff together when things open up a little bit more this summer. I'm sure of that. So he's David Sisk. I'm Andrew Jones. Thanks for stopping by.